Hello. So today we're going to be talking about just briefly the causes of World War I, and more importantly, why the United States ends up joining World War I. So that's what we're going over today in class. So this starts the second half of Unit 2, which we'll be finishing up probably with our test the 2 days before Thanksgiving. So either the Monday or Tuesday before Thanksgiving, depending on when I see you for class. So that is the plan. So a couple more lessons on World War I. But first, let's talk about what gets it started. So you should have watched the Causes of World War I Edpuzzle last week for your assignment, or earlier this week for your assignment. And in that, it talks about the acronym to remind us what cause is the World War I. This is not just a Miss Morris acronym. This is one that people use when they teach it all over the place. So it should be pretty easy to find if you need the information. But it is mania. So these are the 5 main causes of World War I. So the first one is militarism, and we will talk more about each of these in a minute, but militarism. The second one is alliances. The third one is nationalism. The fourth one is imperialism, which we have already talked about, American imperialism, but remember, it wasn't just the United States that was using that. And the assassination. So that says, I can never spell anything, the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. So these are the 5 causes of World War I, and we're going to look a little bit more closely at each of them. So the first one is militarism, and militarism is exactly what it sounds like. Look at military. It's having large military. And during this time, in the early 1900s, we have Germany competing with Britain to build the most battleships, because this is still at an age where you are fighting most of your wars by foot, by horse, by battleship. We're going to start to get some planes and some tanks as we enter into World War I, but we're still fighting on horses and still fighting a lot of our battles on the sea during this time. And so Germany and Britain are competing with each other to build as many battleships as they can. And the British are getting a little fearful of an attack on their empire. And when I say the British Empire, I'm not talking about just Britain. I'm talking about a very large area of the world during this time, because Britain was one of the first countries to imperialize and have control over different areas. So you can see in this map, all the areas that are this color pink were controlled by Britain in 1900. So you can see here Canada, Australia, some countries, and lots of countries in Africa, India, and also, of course, Britain right here. So they control a lot of territory. In comparison, you can see the German Empire, which has a lot of neighboring territory to British empires. Theirs are in this color orange, and you can see right here, these are all controlled by Germany. So the British are afraid that the Germans might attack them somewhere in their empire. It doesn't necessarily need to be in the actual nation of Britain. Now, in addition to that, we also have, that's the slide I want, Germany competing with making larger and larger armies with some of their other neighbors or close areas with France and Russia. And you can see here the comparison of how many people were in their military in 1880 with then not even 30 years later, how many people were in their military in 1914 at the start of World War I. Germany goes from 1.3 million soldiers to 5 million soldiers. France goes to 750,000 to 4 million, and Russia goes from not even 500,000 to 1 million. So all of these different nations are building up their militaries. So here's the thing though. I want you to imagine a child getting a lot of toys, right? They're getting new, let's just use, a kid who gets lots of battleships, a kid who gets lots of maybe trucks, a kid who get lots of like action figures, and they've got all these things, all these toys. Are they really just going to put them in their toy box and walk away? No. What they're going to do is they're going to use those toys and they're going to play games with them. Just like Germany and France and Russia, they're building up their militaries. They're going to want to use them. And so that's really where militarism comes. So militarism is the first one. The second one is alliances. So an alliance is somebody that you're friends with, but if you're a nation, an alliance means that if they go to war, then you also go to war. So sometimes it can drag nations into war that wouldn't necessarily have gotten there in the first place. And you can see by 1914, this little map here, all the major powers of Europe were all linked by this system of alliances. The ones that are in red are Allied powers. Yeah, we talk about Allied powers later in World War II, but it's just the same term. There are some differences too. But you can see England, France, Italy, and Russia are all aligned with each other. And then we have the Central Powers, the German Empire, Austria-Hungary, which is an empire, and Turkey are all aligned as well. And so these alliances make a war much more likely to start because let's say even though England wasn't really too interested in going to war, if France or Italy was pulled into a war with Germany or Austria-Hungary or Turkey, then England would have to come in and support them. So this also kind of leads to the setup of war. The next one is imperialism. And remember, imperialism is, not imperialism, nationalism, because N comes before I. Let's go to nationalism. The next one is nationalism. And this is on an age when countries really wanted to show their power and their independence. So a lot of very large empires at this time, like Austria-Hungary, or even Germany, or even Russia, they were very, very large, and they encompass lots of different groups of people. And in some of the cases, those groups of people didn't want to be part of that larger empire. They wanted to create their own nation. And a really good example of that would be this, they're called Slavs, or in Serbia. They were being controlled by Russia and by Serbia and some other places, but they wanted to break off and they wanted to control their own nation. So they were starting to do like little uprisings and fighting back against the mother country to try to get their own country. And so that's another, again, nationalism. And also nationalism comes with sometimes a blind following of your leaders. So even if they're not doing really good things, you stick behind them just because you know you are a part of that country. So it kind of intertwines both, and that also can lead to going to war. Imperialism, we've already talked a lot about that, but this is in terms of Europe, not the United States. And notice that this pretty much is just in the Eastern Hemisphere. Remember that this right here, everything to the right, is going to be the Western Hemisphere, but some of them we kind of just excuse and let them be part of it. But you can see the United States on our map. This is our colony, the Philippines, which we've talked about. But otherwise, you can see all these other places are controlled by different places in Europe. We have large areas of France is in this purple color. Belgium is in this darker purple color. Britain is going to be this orange color. Even Italy has some territory. So these European countries are expanding into these different places, and they're going to want to continue to expand. And in some cases, they're starting to push their boundaries of expanding even further. Okay, and the last part of mania that caused World War I is the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. And you can see right here, this is a picture of him and his wife. And that's a painting of him and his wife and kind of a recreation of what happened. So in June of 1914, the heir to the throne, so the person who is next in line to the throne of Austria-Hungary, is Franz Ferdinand. And he goes to the capital of Bosnia, which is Sarajevo, which was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but they were a group of nationalists trying to get their own country. And while he's there, he is attacked by, I always butcher the name, but Gavrilo Princip, and he shoots the Archduke and his wife, and they both die. And the Austrians are very upset about this because they have now lost the heir to their throne, the person who is supposed to be their next king. And they say, you know what, Serbia, where the attack happened, it's your fault. You let terrorists come here. This is your fault. And Serbia gets a little bit upset about that. So Serbia is upset about being blamed for the assassination. And Russia, who is friendly with Serbia, said, you know what, Serbia, we got your back. And they send in troops to support Serbia. Germany says no, and you can't do this. You cannot get involved because Germany was already supporting Austria-Hungary. They were already buds. They were allies. And as soon as Germany gets involved and Russia does not listen because Russia has his troops out, Germany ends up declaring war on Russia. And then everything else just kind of falls down because remember the map from the very beginning where we have the different allies. I'll try and show you that right here, the different alliances. Because of this, now Germany and Russia are at war, but also because Austria-Hungary and Turkey are allies with Germany, they're also at war with Russia. And because Italy and France are allies with Russia, they're now at war together. And England gets dragged in as well. So that's why these alliances really play such a key role. So moving on, here's our little map here to kind of show who's involved at this point. So why did Britain end up getting involved? Well, Britain again had alliances with France and Russia, and so they end up getting pulled into the war. And the question then becomes, what about the US? Because we're not in Europe. We're far away. We had already told Europe we were going to leave them alone with the Monroe Doctrine. And the US is not interested in going to war in 1914. We are thousands of miles away from Europe. This is before airplanes can fly across the Atlantic Ocean. And it's a 2-week journey from a ship to get from Europe to the United States. So we feel pretty safe at this point. We also have a lot of anti-imperialists, people who are against imperialism, that really do not want the war, the United States to go to war. They think that's aggression, that we should mind our own business. A lot of Americans also still have family in Europe because they've recently immigrated to the United States, family on both sides, families on the Allied side and on the Central Power side, and they just want to stay out of it. And the main reason, though, is that the U.S. has a lot of economic ties with the Allies, and we're going to start trading with England and France and Russia, even though we say that we're staying neutral. So what ends up getting the U.S. to join the war? So the fighting goes on for 3 years before the United States even joins the war. So we do not join the war until 1917. So all this fighting is going on in Europe, and we continue to support the British. But the Germans, obviously, and also Austria-Hungary, but mainly the Germans, are trying to attack the British, especially using U-boats or submarines. They are doing something called unrestricted submarine warfare, where they're basically having a no rules war with any ships that come along. So anytime a submarine is found by the German submarines, the U-boats, or a ship is found traveling the Atlantic Ocean, the Germans are attacking them, whether it's an American ship, whether it's a British ship, doesn't matter. And that's unrestricted warfare. And the United States said that this violated our neutrality. It said that by them attacking our ships, we weren't part of the war. They need to leave us alone because we're neutral. But in reality, the Germans are attacking them because we are giving supplies to the British. So the Germans end up sinking a British ship, the Lusitania, that had Americans on it. Killed 128 Americans, and that really makes the United States mad. Another thing that makes the United States mad is the Zimmerman Note, sometimes also called the Zimmerman Telegraph, which is a note that the Germans send to Mexico, telling Mexico to join the war on the side of the Germans. And if they did that, they would help Mexico get territory from the United States. So we don't like that either. We intercept that note and we find out about it. And the last thing that happens that really helps us end up or encourages us to join the war is in 1917 there is a revolution in Russia, and Russia goes from being a monarchy with a czar or king to a democracy. Now they're communism, and today we don't always think of communism being a democracy, but in 1917 communism was a democracy, and so we were a lot more willing to go and be a ally with a fellow democracy, where we were a little bit more hesitant before when they were a monarchy. So that's where we are. In 1917, the U.S. ends up declaring war. And that's what you're going to continue to read about a little bit later for your assignment. So 2 things real quick. Just remember that the deadline for all first quarter work, I cannot speak today, deadline for all first quarter work is November 10th. No work will be accepted after midnight on November 10th. Literally, the assignments will lock in Gradebook and Schoology, and you cannot submit them. And I'm not submitting anything. I'm not adding anything because there's no new work. This is all old work. The deadline is on Tuesday. This assignment is not part of first quarter work. This will be the first assignment for second quarter. So this assignment is due on Monday or Tuesday, depending on when you have class. And it is a reading and questions that you can find in your Schoology. The U.S. enters World War I. So make sure you're using the reading that is in the folder for this week, labeled U.S. enters World War I reading, to complete the assignment. If you have any questions, let me know, and we will continue talking about the U.S. involvement in World War I next time. Bye.